Hey everyone, it's Sean. We're going to be moving on to the Illustrator portion of our class from here on out. And to get us going off onto a good foot, I want to talk about the layers panel for a bit. The layers panel is a crucial part of your workflow, and if you have a good setup for layers right from the get-go, your projects will run much smoother. So that's going to be the most important thing we talk about today. So in your week 4 Illustrator Basics folder, there are 4 other folders in here. I'd like you to open up the layers folder and open up this layers demo project here. I have mine already open up and ready to go. So when you open it up, I would like everyone to just take a second and go up to Window, Workspace, and make sure you're set to Essentials Classic. And then after you have it reset, go back to Window, Workspace, and reset Essentials Classic. This will just make sure that we all have the same interface, nobody has any crazy menus or windows open, and we can just sort of focus on the task at hand. So with that being said, if you come over to your right hand side, there is the layers panel right here. It's the multiple sort of layers stacked on top of each other. And I'm just going to click and drag this out and then close that panel really quickly. There we go. Cool. So this is a file that I was working on previously. It's just going to serve as a really good demonstration file to sort of look at layer structure from and how to best organize your Illustrator files in case you have to go back to them later, you have to hand over a file, or you just want to have an organized workflow. So right from the get-go, you notice I have about 5 layers, and I'm just going to turn off all of the layers except for the sketch layer. And this sketch is usually how you guys will be using Illustrator. You'll be sketching something by hand, importing it in, and then working off of your sketch. That's sort of the most successful workflow you can have, especially when you're a beginner in Illustrator. But there's a couple things about this that are going to hinder our progress in here. And the first is when you first open up a new document in Illustrator, you only have one layer. It's usually called layer 1, and it's the base layer here. That's where you would be placing your sketch on. And if you're a little quick to the draw, what you might do is just place your sketch down. You might just lock that one piece of the layer, and then you could easily start drawing all these more complex shapes on top of it and keep everything on one layer. That's incredibly messy, and it could run into some problems down the line when you get really complicated graphics and everything is sort of just difficult to dissect and select and deal with. So what we would do is we would place our sketch in, and then we could double click on the layer and be sure to rename the layer to what you're going to have on that layer, right? Then we have a few different options down here. You can instantly lock the layer just by selecting the lock button, hit OK, and you'll notice that there is a lock feature that just ticked on over here. I'm going to uncheck that for now. I'm going to double click on the sketch layer again, and I'm going to come over here. The next thing that I want to point out to you is this option here called template. And what template does is it'll keep the sketch here. It will automatically dim any images on this layer to 50%, which is really important. And then it actually creates a separate type of layer. You'll notice it's no longer an eyeball here. It's actually just like this little squarish icon that symbolizes a template. And if we quickly turn on all of our other layers just by clicking once and dragging up, we have our design back here. And the next thing that I want to point out is the outline feature. So if we hit Command Y, that'll jump us into our outlines for this shape. Mine's pretty complicated and not the most sophisticated in terms of outlines, but it'll do the trick. So what we notice is you can still see the sketch underneath our outlines of shapes. This is pretty crucial because if you're trying to accurately draw your lines to the sketch, you can use outlines to have a very simple view of your design and the shapes that you're trying to build, and you can match them very easily to your sketch that would be underneath. I'm going to hit Command Y to jump out of outline mode again. And instead, I'm going to uncheck all of our layers, make them invisible. I'm going to double click on sketch, and I'm going to uncheck template. This will show you the difference between having a template layer and just a standard image layer. So if you'd like to make these layers visible again, and we'll hit Command Y one more time. you'll notice that my image disappeared. I cannot see it through all of my outlines, and it's actually just become this box sort of a shape. That is obviously not ideal, and kind of difficult to deal with, to be honest. So that's why if you're ever going to be working with a sketch in Illustrator, I would highly recommend putting it on template mode, dim images to 50%, labeling it as such, and hitting OK, and then moving on with the start of the rest of all of your design work. Also, by keeping this layer locked, it just means that you're not ever going to move it by mistake. It's just unselectable, which is just a really good safeguard from messing up when you're working on something that could be very complicated. The next thing I'd like to show you guys is this cool little feature with layer tools. So right here we have our layer base layer, and you could easily just you could create a new shape. I'm just going to use a polygon tool and draw out whatever the last polygon was I had. And you can see there is a polygon shape that we just added. I'm going to delete that guy there, and it goes away. The other option that we have when in the layers tool is you can create a new sublayer. And this acts a little bit different from the shapes that are showing up. I believe that now if we drew out that polygon, it sits within a new sublayer. So sometimes this could be useful if you're the type of person who really only likes to have one layer for some reason. Just try and make use of the sublayer option. This could also be useful if you're trying to layer certain things all within one section. So for example, I have the gems up here on their own layer, and these are 4 very basic simple elements. We could easily select these 4 gems like so. Actually, no, what I'm going to do, sorry. I'm just going to lock everything really quickly except for the gems layer, and I'm just going to click and drag to select them all. And then I'm just going to unlock everything one more time. So with the gems selected, we can click on this new layer 6, and then we can right click on our gems and hit arrange, send to current layer. And now our gems sit within this mirror base layer, but they don't necessarily have to be on their own layer themselves. They're within a sublayer, and we could rename this by double clicking and just name that gems. And so now you see we have our gems, we have our mirror base, and we have this empty layer here, which you could delete if you'd want, and everything still stays the same. The appearance still stays the same because the order of how they stack on top of one another of all these different elements, it stays the same as well. So the next thing that I'd like to point out is if you see the interior of this sort of glass piece here, it's in this sort of pinkish, purplish sort of tone, this little circular stroke that's on the outside, and you can see it correlates with the color up here. So this is sort of a happy accident, but it's a really good teachable moment, because if you're trying to deal with elements on a layer that are being showcased by a similar outline to the colors that you have, it can kind of make it difficult to understand what elements you're actually trying to grab and work with. So if we double click on this layer, you'll notice that you have a color option, and you can either choose from a preset of different colors. So I'm going to choose, what's a color that will really stick out? Green would really stick out from this. It would be very high contrast. Or you can honestly use a color picker and choose any color under the sun if you would like to. I'm going to stick with green. I'm going to hit OK. And now when we hover our mouse over, you'll notice that all the elements are stroked in green instead of stroked in that pinky color. The only issue with this is you notice our towers are also, let me just unlock that, they're also a green color. So this is going to pose a bit of an issue because you might start to think that all of these things are part of the same layer when they're not really. So if you're getting into the habit of changing colors for your layers, just be mindful to choose colors that you haven't used already. It'll just make your life a lot less complicated. So by choosing a different color, this teal blue, we now know that it is differentiated from this green color and that these guys are definitely on a separate layer. One other thing that I just briefly touched on was the arrangement of layers. So if we go back to this mirror base layer here and we open it up. Let's click on something small. Let's click on this little shadowy bit here, this little shadow shape. You'll notice it's right at the very bottom of this whole layer. And if we wanted to bring it further up the stack and make it visible before other elements, you could right click and go to Arrange, bring forward, right? It'll bring it up a step. You could also do Command right bracket, right square bracket or right squiggly bracket, not the brackets that are above your 9 and 0 keys. And you'll notice that it starts to bring it up higher on the stack until we get pretty darn close to the very top, okay? So I actually am going to just send it back using Command left square bracket and put it back into place. The other option that you could do is go to Arrange and bring all the way to front. This will bring it all the way up to the top of the stack, and vice versa. You could right click, Arrange, and send to back. That will do the same thing and send it all the way down to the bottom of the stack. Understanding how layers interact with each other in terms of the stack and in terms of basically how they're layering on top of one another is crucial to creating good illustrations. It can save you plenty of time and agony if you know that you need like similar shapes stacked on top of one another and just shifted down in order to create shadows, as opposed to having to create very pixel perfect or vector perfect shadows. You might just be able to get away with it using very ingeniously stacked layers. That would sort of be my piece of advice when dealing with the layer stack, and in my experience, it seems to have helped me out pretty well. Now, the next thing that we could do is, let's say we want to, so I'm gonna have this gems layer highlighted. I'm gonna create a new layer, and I'm actually going to drag this back out of here. I'm going to call this one gems. I'm going to have our gems selected, and I'm just going to lock everything but our gems sublayer here. That way I can select all of them. Cool. I'm going to just unlock everything one more time. I'm going to make sure that we are selected on our new gems layer here, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to Arrange, Send to Current Layer. And I know this seems a little redundant, but trust me, it'll make sense. I'm going to drag the gems layer on top of the mirror base layer, and I'm going to select both of these guys, and I'm going to hit the hamburger menu here, and I'm going to select Merge Selected. And what Merge Selected does is it will merge all of the elements from both layers into one layer. So to try this one more time, I'm going to use the mirror glass layer and the mirror base layer. You can see how many elements are in the mirror glass layer, right? It's kind of a bit, but not crazy amounts. So I'm going to select both of these guys, and I'm going to hit Merge Selected. And now you can see everything is sitting within one layer, mirror glass, and it's merged in all of our glass elements. It has our gems that we previously merged in as well, and then it has all the other grouped elements that form the base of this mirror. Now, the nice thing about that feature is it still keeps everything separated. So all of the glass elements will be sitting on top because they were on top of the stack initially, and all of our regular mirror elements will be underneath because they were on the bottom of the stack. I'm just going to Command Z to separate these two layers, and I'm going to Command Z one more time to separate the gems out from the mirror base. And I'm going to drag this guy back on top of the stack. Now, similar to InDesign in how we tried to make sure we had imagery on one layer, design elements on other layers, you can also create just, new layers for things like text. So let's say you're working in an agency and you want to send something off to a colleague for notes, for some feedback. You could create a layer that's called notes. You could very easily lock all of your work just like so, and then whatever sort of things your coworkers might have to tell you, this looks cool, they could just leave on a layer, and that way when you're dealing with trying to figure out their feedback, you could very easily just lock it, or you could turn it off if you don't need it. So just sort of being aware of your options here when it comes to what you can do with layers. It's pretty important stuff. I just find it has a great impact on the speed and flow of what you can do in Illustrator, which is much more useful than if you just design everything on one flat layer. So just something to be in mind of as you guys are moving throughout this part of the course. That's it for this video. I'll catch you guys on the next one.